Hello, friends. Welcome to Science Talk. I am your host and resident oceanographer, Jim Massa. Okay, I want to discuss with you this article that was published 28th of June of 2022 on the online publication EOS. Ocean acidification may drive diatom decline. This is big. Diatoms contribute to global oxygen production, marine food webs, and carbon sequestration. But scientists predict that diatom populations will decline because of ocean acidification associated with climate change. And here we see photos of various types of diatoms. Diatoms, like a little photo caption here, diatoms like these account for up to 40% of marine primary production. So this is big. Now, they're a type of single cell alga, invisible to the naked eye. Their opal shells are made of silicic acid, silica, basically. Like other algae, diatoms need light to survive, photosynthesize, right? So you're going to find them in the photic zone. Now, they talk about before dissolving and sinking to the seafloor. That's where we start talking about various compensation depths, or after the organisms die and they sink to the seafloor in the form of marine snow, which is a way to sequester carbon to death. So, like any other primary producers on land, in water, whatever, you take the CO2, you take the water, you take light energy, and you make glucose, food out of it. And oxygen is a byproduct, and we need the oxygen. Diatoms generate around 20% of Earth's oxygen and transport CO2 to the deep ocean for long term storage. And they are sensitive to their surroundings, so they can reveal clues about environmental change. This is when you start, pulling up cores, geological cores, and then you run isotopic fractionation analyses on it, and then you can ascertain what the situation was at that period in time. Well, you can also analyze living diatoms to understand current trends and fossil diatoms to see what happened years ago. Geological evidence has shown that diatoms date back to at least the lower Cretaceous. So they were around when the dinosaurs were around, even though the Cretaceous was the last of the Mesozoic era. So climate change has many effects on aquatic environments, including ocean acidification, and from here on they're going to abbreviate as OA. Okay? And we know that you take the CO2 that's mixed into the water, CO2 plus water makes carbonic acid, right? Acid is your acidification. This acidification affects the survival of marine life, resulting in things that we've seen, such as coral bleaching, declining oyster reproduction, altered clam metabolism, compromised immune responses in sea urchins. The food webs associated with these organisms are not always able to adjust to swift population declines. There's one other important thing about this acidification is that it changes what's called the CCD, the calcite compensation depth. And basically, the calcite compensation depth is the layer in the water column where below that depth, calcite stays in solution. Above the depth, it can precipitate out. Well, if you're an organism that uses calcite, which basically calcium carbonate, so it's CaCO3, so the CO2 is part of it. But if an organism needs calcium carbonate to create its shells, it needs to be above the CCD. And by the way, the transition zone is called a lysocline, very much like a thermocline, a pycnocline, a halocline, right? Or even a nutricline. It's a rapid change in concentrations in the vertical water column, and it could also be horizontal. So what we are seeing is a shoaling of the CCD, the lysocline. It's getting shallower and shallower, which means that the organisms that need the calcite to make their shells are unable to because it's staying in solution. That will, of course, increase their mortality. So they didn't mention that here, but that is an extremely important manifestation, ramification, whatever is a better word there, but as a very important aspect of what is happening with the ocean acidification. Ecological collapses associated with ocean acidification have occurred before. For example, the PETM, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, which about 56 million years ago. Coral reefs disappeared. Deep sea microbes nearly disappeared in an extinction event associated with ocean acidification. Geologists look back and to understand what happened, and they showed that CO2 levels were the cause for the PETM ecological collapse. Because the CO2 levels jacked up, and it caused what we just described here. Well, guess what? The CO2 levels today are rising faster than they did during the PETM. You have heard me say before, it's the rate of change that is extremely troubling. It's so fast that organisms are not given time to adjust. Diatoms have usually been considered less vulnerable to ocean acidification compared with calcifying organisms like corals. Calcifying, they need the calcite, but they are not immune. Okay, in a study published in Nature, Jan Taucher of the Geomar Heimholtz Center for Ocean Research Kiel and his co-researchers completed experiments, a meta-analysis, and Earth system model simulations to predict how ocean acidification could globally affect diatoms in the future. They conducted 5 in situ mesocosm experiments, and it's kind of described as an oversized test tube, with natural plankton communities in different biomes, finding that ocean acidification would increase the elemental ratio of silicon to nitrogen. This shift appeared to be caused by a slower dissolution of silica as seawater pH decreases. And this was supported by analysis of a global sediment trap data. So obviously they were doing some chemical analyses there to ascertain the changes in such a ratio. So they conducted one of the mesocosm experiments in the waters surrounding the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard. So it looks like they got some equipment put in place there. So probably, looking at some area and looking down vertically. Taucher explained that the slower dissolution of diatom opal shells limits the abundance and distribution of the microbes. These shells sink deeper before being converted back to dissolved silica. This leads to a redistribution of silica, i.e., less silicic acid in the surface ocean, meaning that less of this nutrient remains in the surface ocean, which is where the diatoms access the sunlight they need to survive. And if there's less in the surface ocean, they can't make their tests. which they need to survive. Adrian Marchetti, who is an associate professor at UNC Chapel Hill, Department of Earth, Marine, and Environmental Sciences, said the study provides new insights into how oceanic acidification will alter the remineralization of silica in the ocean. And given how diatoms play critical roles in marine food webs and Earth's carbon cycle, a decline in diatoms in the world's ocean could have substantial consequences. Well, if they provide 20% of atmospheric oxygen, I would say so. Tauchin's co-authors predicted that ocean acidification will drive a global decline of diatoms by between 13 and 26% by the year 2200. Well, that's a far off projection into the future. But there's something else related to this, and it wasn't mentioned here. There's another problem affecting diatoms. Yes, they talked about specifically ocean acidification, and they were correct to do so. Warming temperatures. Diatoms prefer cold water. In places where they usually thrive, the oceanic waters are warming. Diatoms are not doing too well. In fact, in the Bering Sea and in the Gulf of Alaska, we're seeing a shift in the dominant phytoplankton community. The shift is from diatoms, a colder water preference phytoplankton. They're being replaced by coccolithophorids, or coccoliths for short. And coccolithophorids prefer warmer waters. Well, it turns out that the coccoliths, when you look at their net primary productivity, is less than that of the diatoms. And we usually ascertain this by looking at the satellite imagery of the chlorophyll A concentrations, and from that we can estimate biomass and so on and so forth. But we're already seeing that it's not just the increasing acidification, it's the increasing temperatures affecting the diatoms. And they're being replaced by a group of phytoplanktons that do prefer the warmer waters, but their productivity is less than that of the diatoms. And of course, that's going to change ecosystems dynamics. And we're seeing that. This is another example of how what's happening in the oceans affecting the planet. And the oceans are in severe stress and they are dying. Between increased water temperatures, decreasing oxygen levels, increasing acidification, decreasing primary productivity, and all the ramifications that carries for the ecosystems and species diversity, extinctions, and so on, oceans are in big time trouble. So, there you have it. Until next time.